This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2, here we go. We're going to talk about a serious issue in a couple of minutes with retired Colonel Daniel Davis. He's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about the very serious issue that the United States has already hit, has triggered the nuclear escalation with Russia. It's getting no coverage. Nobody wants to talk about it. This is something the Biden administration has done. I raised the alarm on this over the weekend on a number of X-Twitter spaces, and I really challenged a lot of Republicans and people in the MAGA movement to start communicating this to the president. It's really important. This is a good opportunity to really sideline Joe Biden, to show how reckless the Biden administration has been pushing nuclear escalation. And luckily, we saw these statements from the president in the last 24 hours. He's actually saying this at the moment. So this is a good sign. This is a good sign that Donald Trump is addressing this issue and making it a priority in his campaign communications. That's not merely for the benefit of Donald Trump or his electoral ambitions. It's for the benefit of all Americans, all people in Europe, pretty much everyone in the world can benefit from a nuclear de-escalation or military de-escalation between the West and Russia. I hope everybody agrees with me on that. That's what we'll talk about. And we'll talk about how clear and present this danger is with Daniel Davis in just a few minutes. But this idea that we should be paying attention to Anthony Fauci's emails right now at this point, it's just mind-boggling that this is the hill that the GOP want to fight on, the House and the Senate. And let me just put this in the frame. This is something that could be litigated later, okay, if at all. But what's interesting about this is all the focus is on COVID and gain of function. These are the two biggest red herrings of this whole farrago, okay? While everyone's chasing this mythical virus called COVID-19 that they claim had gone around the world in lightning speed and came out of a lab in Wuhan, although no one's shown any evidence that that actually happened, other than fake computer-generated genomic sequences, courtesy of the Chinese CDC, funny enough. It's funny how the American authorities just took that, the European authorities just took that computer-generated genomic sequence, allegedly of SARS-CoV-2, and used it to basically standardize the fake PCR test that has a 97% or 99% false positive rate, maybe 100%. So instead of going after the vaccine, everyone's chasing the mythical submicroscopic particle, allegedly SARS-CoV-2, supposedly from gain of function. This is unbelievable. It shows you how out to lunch people are, how eager they are to avoid the big problem. The thing that really was the scourge was the experimental vaccine. That's real. You can document the victims of that. But as far as COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, there is nothing extraordinary beyond a normal flu season. But the people who did die were the thousands that were pushed onto respirators because of the panic, the fear, and the hysteria, and the financial incentives for hospitals to do that. The absolute corruption in the medical industry, the medical industrial complex, okay, that's what caused those excess deaths. All those deaths of despair, people not getting seen in hospitals, they're furloughing all their nursing staff because they supposedly tested positive using the fake PCR test. I mean, intelligent people with analytical minds should be able to see how all this went down. We documented it very, very well and step by step over the 2 or 3 year period at 21stcenturywire.com and on this program as well when TNT was on radio in 2022 and on the UK column before that. Did countless segments on this, along with interviews with some of the top people who really understand this issue. And here we're going backwards, chasing this 82-year-old man in the white coat, this 5'2" wonder, this Mel Brooks doppelganger, known as Anthony Fauci, who's already retired, who will never lose a penny of his pension, who is not going to serve a day in jail, period. It's a waste of time and energy. Meanwhile, real crimes are running rampant, and we are being dragged along into a World War III type situation that we will not be able to get out of, either in the Ukraine or in the Middle East. Take your pick. That seems to me like should be a priority to everybody in the House and Senate right now. Not to mention the total corruption and weaponization of the U.S. system of checks and balances, talking about the FBI, the DOJ, the court system. Not to mention all the Biden-Ukraine corruption, the bribery, evidence of all sorts of graft, and corruption to do with Biden, Hunter, Joe, Ukraine. That's just the beginning. That should be the priority, not chasing after the old Fauci, who nothing's going to happen to him because you can't prove any of the allegations other than, well, you deleted a few emails. And there's research in Wuhan of gain of function. Research of gain of function. And by the way, in the field of virology, there have been no developments or discoveries or proven to weaponize viruses using gain of function. There's one experiment. We went through it on this program. In fact, we'll have to bring our biologists and academics and people who have actually audited these studies again to explain to you there is no gain of function in the world of virology. But there's millions of dollars spent on grant research because it's a gravy train. It's part of the military-industrial complex under bioweapons or countermeasures. If you're in the know and you're well connected, you can make a fortune out of this, and many do. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. There is gain of function in bacteria, phages, and MSRA superbugs. There's a lot of pedigree and proven scientific, empirical developments in that area, but nothing in virology, only research. Research and computer-generated, computer-modeled genomic sequences, like the one the Chinese CDC gave to our CDC and the NIH and the European health officials of what they claimed, the Chinese claimed, was a SARS-CoV-2 novel coronavirus. Didn't happen. There is no evidence of SARS-CoV-2 from any live patient sample. None. Didn't happen. What you have was people getting sick, a normal pneumonia and flu season. The reaction to it, however, caused more excess deaths than anything. And the real crime, of course, the real victims came after the deployment of an experimental pharmaceutical product, where they waived all regulations and dumped all of these doses onto the global population, said, don't worry about it. We'll deal with the clinical trials later. It's safe and effective. Trust us. Those were all lies. That's the real crime. That's the one that they're not pursuing in the House and Senate and Congress this week. You see, it's gaslighting. It's a red herring, and it's not going to it's not going to bring anybody to the table for accountability who should be dragged right there. If they want to grill Fauci, do it on the vaccine, not the mythical SARS-CoV-2 supposed pandemic. What a waste of time and money, but that's what government does. They're really good at it. They'll waste your time and money, they'll kill you, and then they'll waste more time and money investigating themselves. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, is this not what's happening? I don't know what more to say other than will we have to litigate this all over again on this program? We'll see. Let's take a break right now with TNT. And when we come back, we're going to connect our guest, Daniel Davis. Looking forward to this very, very important conversation. Now we're going to get to a real issue. World War III on the other side. It is a clear and present danger. I'm Patrick Henningsen. Stay with us.
TNT's Dirk Pullman.
In America, growing up, there was always such a gap in kind of our historical knowledge, because if you look at our sources of information, it was always the Germans. All of this information that we were taught as Americans comes from the Germans. A lot of it comes from Franz Halder and people like that who wrote after the war.
Yeah, then we have to explain Franz Halder had been, that is a very interesting story in the beginning. Franz Halder had been the chief of staff of the German armed forces. He was planning the war against the Soviet Union, and he is responsible for the atrocities because he published these orders which declared that the civilian population would have to be treated not according to the Geneva Convention, that the Russian soldiers, the Soviet soldiers, should not be treated according to that. So the war of extermination, which it was, he was the architect of that.
The Dirk Pohlman Show on today's News Talk, TNT. A better business tip from TNT Radio. News Talk Radio listeners are some of the most active and involved listeners of any format. TNT Radio listeners rely on TNT Radio often as their primary source of information. They trust TNT Radio and are highly engaged with the content. If you'd like more information about advertising on TNT Radio, simply fill out your details on our contact page and we'll be in touch. To find out more, go to tntradio.live.
At the top of the hour, we'll keep on top of the news.
It's the most important thing we can do.
On today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2 of this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Thank you for rejoining us here on TNT, today's News Talk. Now, I want to bring onto the stage a very special guest. He's been on the program before. He is a military veteran. He's also a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. He's an author and the host of Deep Dive with Daniel Davis. Danny, I really appreciate you coming on the program this week.
You bet. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Now, a lot of people might have missed a lot of important things happened last week, but these were crowded out or covered up by the big story politically, of course, was the verdict with Donald Trump. But while this was happening, some incredible things happened under the cover of that. One of those was the U.S. And Britain struck Yemen in major airstrike in multiple cities. That escalation was very much underreported, but there's something else I'm going to bring on screen, Daniel, which I'm sure you're well aware of. This was from Politico, a leak to Politico, that Joe Biden had secretly given a green light to Zelensky, to the Ukrainians, to hit targets inside Russia with U.S. weapons. Daniel, this is a total reversal of everything that's been said publicly for the last 2+ years, and there it is, drifted out as a leak to Politico. And when I saw that, Daniel, I'm sure you were concerned to see this as well, that maybe more bad news is going to follow that, and indeed it has. But your thoughts on this, how this has played out, and what your concerns are.
Well, first of all, it troubles me just the fact that this was a secret decision that was made when you're talking about the President of the United States giving authorization as the Commander-in-Chief to take actions which, with American military, probably even cooperation, and certainly with our assets, can strike a nuclear weapon state and potentially drag us into a war, and it doesn't even get discussed, doesn't even get debated, much less authorized by Congress before anything like that can happen. It is a big trouble because, look, if this goes bad, if this goes sideways, you don't get to choose pretty much what happens after that. This thing could explode and draw us into a direct confrontation, which could all too easily go nuclear with Russia, and they're very aware of this, and they're not hiding it. This at the highest levels. They keep warning us over and over and saying, "Don't think we're bluffing here, because we're not. We're not going to allow our country to be attacked basically by NATO countries directly into their country."
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment, Daniel. Now, let's just say in a parallel universe that was a policy change by the White House in past administrations or normal times in history, because clearly this is not a normal time in history. If there was such a policy change as this, how would it be announced to the public? Would it be done with some kind of a press briefing? Would there be some kind of chance to get a consensus on this? Just from your experience, how would an administration go about doing this normally?
Yeah, I think there's a good at least correlation with what happened with Obama in 2013. When he was said that I think we should attack Syria because it's the use of chemical weapons, but that could potentially spawn a war. So we're actually going to go and debate the issue in Congress. We're going to let the American people have their decision or have their say. And man, did the people ever have their say? I actually gave a brief on the Hill. I was part of that process back then, and look, I had a lot of problems with some of the things that Obama did, but I gave him a lot of credit for first given the American people a chance to have their say, and when they had their say, then he let that stand. He didn't go into the other direction. But this one, didn't follow that, and it was trying to do it privately. And I don't even know, I didn't see how that news came to light, who actually came to it, but it's concerning that he was ready to take action without even talking to anybody first. And we know now, since that time, that we have already taken action. HIMARS have been used in Belgorod, a Russian city a lot of those missiles were shot down, but they were actually attacked. So it's already happening.
So I remember August 2013 vividly, Daniel, and I was in Britain at the time, and that actually came for a vote on the floor of the House of Commons. David Cameron was prime minister at the time, and they lost the motion to strike Syria by the slimmest of margins. I think it was a swing of about 7 votes either way. And it didn't happen as a result. Now, history would have unfolded very differently, possibly, had that passed, and the United States would have gone together with Britain, shoulder to shoulder, the special relationship, etc. Is it possible, Daniel, that because of what you've just described in Washington and what I've just described in London, that there are forces, call it the deep state or the establishment, that don't want to go down that route anymore, and this is the route in which they're going to change policy as a direct result of 2013? Your thoughts?
I do. I mean, who knows what it's really called, the deep state or just forces, who knows what, but there are unquestionably individuals in very powerful positions, not all of which are in government, that are still powerful, that absolutely want to go this way. They don't want to have open government. They don't want the people to have a say because they think they know better. They think that you can't leave this to the people because they'll make bad choices, bad decisions, because they don't understand like we do. So let's keep this in the quiet. Let's keep this in the dark so that we can do what's best for everybody here. And that is an absolute recipe for disaster, because it's been my experience through the last 20 or 30 years of being in the military and just being in international relations, that the people actually, by and large, have a lot better idea of what should happen and how to keep peace than the so-called experts who have, a lot of power at the upper echelon. So I would definitely like to see that process be reversed.
I think a lot of people would probably agree with you on that, Daniel, not least of all because it's in everybody's self-interest for self-preservation and survival. But I want to bring this story. This also broke at the same time as this notorious leak, supposedly from the White House to Politico. This is the New York Times. Let's bring this article up on screen right now. Ukrainian drone strikes target Russian nuclear early warning radar stations. This is a facility 1,100 miles into Russia. Was allegedly damaged here, according to satellite imagery that they can confirm. And the details of this are extremely disturbing. So 1,100 miles from the Ukrainian border, as I understand it. And Tuesday morning, and reported that Ukrainian drone was downed in this remote location and home to 2 radar stations here. Ukraine has used its own drones and missiles to carry out these strikes, but they come as officials in Kiev have made urgent appeals to the United States for permission to fire powerful American-made weapons into Russia. The Biden administration had for weeks resisted those appeals for fear that getting drawn into a wider war, but is now agreed to let. And here's the problem with the language, Daniel, to let Ukraine use its weapons to fire into Russia. So when New York Times or Washington says Ukraine can use its weapons, they mean U.S. weapons or NATO member state weapons that have been given to Ukraine. Do you see the game that's being played semantically here? I'm quite flabbergasted to read this, that the New York Times also kind of playing word games with this as well. This is a disturbing story, Daniel, because this represents an escalation up the nuclear ladder, does it not? Go ahead.
It does, and in fact, I've heard conflicting reporting when it was the claim that this was, quote, Ukraine's drones. It's because they got them from the West. I mean, these were sophisticated drones by themselves. And Russia has Vladimir Putin specifically a few days back said, listen, you need to understand that when these kinds of weapons hit long range like this, he goes, these are highly sophisticated things that have to have usually satellite-based telemetry and other data to be able to get on target. That's not anything that Ukraine has. So when we get hit with Western weapons conducted by Western troops, that means we have been attacked, and we're going to regard it as such. We don't know for sure what he means by that, and especially because that came after this strike that you're talking about here. And this is even more disturbing to me than what you laid out here, because this has nothing to do with the tactical fight. This has nothing to do with where things are along the Kupiansk front or the Avdiivka or the Kursk, etc. This has all to do with strategic nuclear forces. And for Ukraine to strike that, in my view, means that the most likely purpose was they want to draw the U.S. into a war with Russia and us on their side, because all that's going to do is nuclear weapons, which Ukraine doesn't have. So why would they strike that unless they know it's a really sensitive thing to try to get Russia to overreact and to potentially draw the United States in. And I think that's something we need to get a big, firm hand on the Ukraine leadership to tell them in no uncertain terms, you take this kind of crap again, you're going to be on your own. Now, I realize that the current leadership in Washington has never taken that kind of a firm stance with anybody, and a lot of people keep running roughshod over us, and I bet that the risk is going to remain high, but that's what we should do.
But even if you're correct, and Ukraine is doing this on its own volition, albeit with Western weapons, isn't it true though that this isn't how the Russians are viewing it? The Russians would be viewing it as that's a U.S. or a NATO proxy knocking out our nuclear early warning radar systems on behalf of NATO. I mean, that's how Russia has to be viewing it.
Yeah, how would they view it any other way?
Ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, then that lines up with what Putin said, because he said, yeah, you can say whatever you want, because he doesn't care about words. He only cares about actions. And when this kind of stuff happens with this kind of technology, he's never going to assume that it was a rogue element here. He's going to assume that they were in coordination, and he's going to take action, because he would be foolish to think anything different, like any other nation would. You have to assume the worst on the intentions when you have capability matched up with that, something that could harm your interest and your ability to defend against a nuclear strike. This is as serious as it gets, and which is why we better make some changes pretty damn quick.
No, I'm glad I have you on the program today, because on the military, tactical, technical, strategic level, to do drone warfare, or even to use the various missiles that have been supplied to Ukraine, you need assistance in terms of satellite reconnaissance, targeting data. The United States has used this going all the way back to the Vietnam War. Pine Gap in Australia played a key role in supporting U.S. targeting in Vietnam, in the Pacific Hemisphere. The Israelis rely on U.S. assistance for a lot what they do in terms of drone warfare via Cyprus or even Stuttgart, Germany. So to think that Ukraine is acting on its own, isn't it the case that they wouldn't be able to act full stop on pretty much all of these types of operations without assistance, direct assistance and coordination with the U.S. military and all of its various array of assets? Can you speak to this issue?
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at both the HIMARS and the ATACMS as really good examples of that, because I remember when it was first announced that we were going to send them HIMARS, my first comment was, perhaps naively, well, there's no way that we can just give those HIMARS to Ukraine, who has no idea how to use them. They don't have any of the infrastructure that goes along with it. They don't have the intelligence and the targeting capacity. Only the United States would have that. And we're not going to use that. We're not going to do that for Ukraine against Russia. That would be crazy. But that's exactly what we've done, because Ukraine doesn't have that kind of resident capacity. So the only way those weapons are fired anywhere, whether the ones into Belgorod the other day or the ones that were fired in actually Ukrainian territory against Russian targets, they all have to come with targeting capability from the United States or Great Britain in some of the cases there. But that's one of the reasons why Germany says they're not going to send their long-range Taurus missiles, because they acknowledge that those missiles can't be fired by Ukraine alone. They would have to use German soldiers, and they're not going to do that. which exposes that that's the same deal for the United States, for Britain, and anyone else who gives that long range stuff. So yes, that is happening, and of course, Russia is aware of it.
So Russia's very aware of this. They know what's involved here. So if this continues, I mean, this should be seen probably as a serious provocation by Russia, as you said. But if it continues, Russia has said that they will not rule out a reciprocal response. In other words, how far would they go? I mean, I'm talking all the way from the ground to the satellites. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, and you've had in just recent couple of weeks where or 3 weeks or so, I guess, Russia has said specifically to the UK, you use some of your long range stuff and it strikes, and we know that you guys are behind it. We are not ruling out the possibility that we could strike British assets outside of Ukraine. You're striking targets outside of Ukraine. We'll strike targets outside of Ukraine as well against Britain. Now, this is a big issue for Russia to decide on, because they have to calculate, do we actually cross that threshold and that Rubicon and actually strike outside of this war zone like the West is now? We've actually already started it. So the question is, do they reciprocate in kind and risk America going, see, I told you, Article 5, here we go, and trying to get into a big war? So they have to make sure that they don't harm their own interests. But we're gambling that they'll continue to make that calculation, that they'll continue to be, quote, rational while we act in irrational ways. And I think that's a bad gamble. And you had, I don't know if you saw it, Adam Kinzinger in CNN a week or so ago on an op-ed wrote in there, it's time to call Putin's bluff. Just don't believe he's going to do what he says. Let's just take this action, which is irrational and just catastrophic. If you're wrong on calling his bluff, that means that we could cross a nuclear threshold. It's unbelievable how casual people are with potential nuclear escalation.
And why do you think that is, Daniel? I mean, this kind of this idea that has infected the minds of the punditry class, of a lot of people in Washington. Is this because of just all the propaganda about Russia fighting with shovels? Do people actually believe any of this stuff? Is this why this casual, blasé attitude that you're talking about here? Is it because of that?
That's probably a portion of it. I think that some of the bigger parts is this just fatal level of arrogance and hubris that we have. There was a famous scene from 60 Minutes last October, shortly after Israel was attacked by Hamas, and President Biden went on 60 Minutes, and they said, hey, can we afford to give all this stuff we've been given to Ukraine and now a bunch of stuff to Israel and still be able to defend our interests worldwide? And Biden said, we're the United States of America, for crying out loud. We're the most powerful nation in the history of the world. I think he believes that, and I think a lot of people do, and they arrogantly think that we can do whatever we want, just like we've done since 1991 when the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War came to an end, and they have lost sight of the fact that it's not 1991 anymore. China's not the way they were. Russia's not the way they were, and now that they have a lot more capability, but we still have this mentality that we can do whatever we want just because we want to do it, and they're powerless to do anything else. And if we act on that kind of arrogance, we may stumble across a line that one day we can't get back.
That's the danger, isn't it, about the whole concept? Maybe you can explain the escalation ladder. There is a point where if you go past a certain threshold, that it's very difficult to dial it back because things happen, and then responses are obligatory at that point. Just explain the problems that we could run into, and we're right up at that level right now. Daniel, go ahead.
And it's also important to talk about the differences in strategy and in intellect on the Russian and the Western side. Russia has a doctrine called escalate to de-escalate. They say if it gets into a situation that's serious, we may escalate way up here so that we can back down to get off of it. Whereas we almost are the opposite of that. So you've got two separate systems working here, which could collide, because we seem to think once you get to a certain level, then you're all in. Whereas Russia would see something to escalate something so that they can back it down and then pull it back. But if it's in Russia's tactical doctrine, not strategic, that if a situation on the battlefield gets bad enough and they're at big enough risk, they will use a battlefield tactical nuclear weapon. And they have just did some exercises on that just the last week. They've been talking about it a lot. They've been warning that this is something that we are willing to do. So if it gets to, some of these strikes in here, they are willing to launch a tactical nuclear weapon in order to bring things back into comms, to wake us up or something like that. But we, on the other hand, our mentality is that once it gets to a certain level, then we are ready to say, all right, let's start just launching the ICBMs and whatnot, and then it could be all over. And I just have to pray that somehow that if we do cross the first threshold, that we don't basically commit national suicide and go all in, because that would be the result of it if we cross that. That's how serious this is, and why it is crucial that we sober up now before we even get to that threshold.
So what needs to happen to get to that sort of point of sobriety? I mean, in the past, Daniel, you see there's administration people, intelligence heads, people would come and write an op-ed, more conscientious members, former members of the government or military, and that would start the conversation going in a positive direction, or a major heavyweight diplomat, or someone like, former CIA director Leon Panetta, instead is taking to the airways, and rather than de-escalating, he's actually escalating. I've got a clip here with Neil Cavuto, which aired recently. This is Leon Panetta, former CIA director, with Neil Cavuto, and this is what he has to say. Let's go ahead and roll this. So I want to get your reaction to this, Danny. Go ahead.
Weapons inside Russia. How do you feel about that?
I think that's the right decision. I think, Ukraine needs to get whatever help it can get in defending itself. And I think NATO has urged that we allow those strikes. France, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, Finland, most of our allies have urged that. I think it is important for the United States to provide a unified approach that allows the Ukrainians to strike at those targets.
I don't know where this Ukraine war goes. You always hear, Secretary, that right now Russia is back having the full advantage here.
Daniel, how would you respond to former CIA director if you had an opportunity?
That is shockingly just ignorant. I mean, there's no more polite way to put it, because, I mean, he even uses the term just to help Ukraine defend itself. How does this help Ukraine defend itself? Because this striking into Russia will have zero strategic impact on the conduct of the war. The war is in my view irreversibly gone into Russian side already, because they have advantages in the air defense, armor, industrial capacity, and most importantly, manpower. And I mean trained manpower. They have chosen to do all those things in ways that you would have to undo every single category, even to have a chance to get back to parity. And there is no such possibility on the horizon at all. Manpower will never come back, because they're already, I mean, they've just lost so many people, and they don't have enough people to come back. So there's no rational path for this to ever go in Ukraine's side tactically. Therefore, to risk a strategic escalation by having a handful of pinprick strikes, and that's all they are, it's not going to change anything, but it could spawn an escalation into state-on-state war. And that is why it is so just irrational, it's illogical, and it's like he doesn't even know what strategy is or how we get there. I'm shocked that a former Secretary of Defense and CIA director is that ignorant on how things actually work.
I want to ask you how this plays out in the final months of the general election, because this issue, whichever way it goes, could be used by one side or another to capitalize or get us into a situation we can't get out of. Daniel, now we're in the election heat of the election final run here. I don't know what's going to happen at the RNC convention or the DNC convention. We don't know even who's going to be on the ballot actually, in all actuality, in November. It could be something different than Biden versus Trump. In this environment that we're in is unprecedented. Now, I'm going to ask you this. What is normal received wisdom with regards to how voters might go if the United States is engaged in a major conflict situation or a war? They stay with the incumbent or they go with the challenger? What I'm asking here, Daniel, is there a motivation by the current White House, the incumbent party president, to escalate in order to somehow maybe point the Russian agent finger again at Donald Trump and say, this is going to be too much for the country. We can't afford to have this guy near the White House. He's too tied in with the Russians. I'm just looking at this escalation pattern here, Daniel, and I'm looking at the White House, and I'm asking the serious question: do they have anything to benefit from this? Go ahead.
In this particular case, I think it's almost the opposite, and here's why: because Biden has placed his absolute credibility as a president on winning for the Ukraine side. There is no chance whatsoever, like I said, for them to win. So that's off the table. So what he has to do is avoid this going anywhere else to get it, make sure it doesn't escalate. And he wants to probably move it past the 5th of November with no change. He just kind of let it kind of just ooch on without any big movements anywhere. So it's just not on the radar. He does not want this on the radar when it comes to voters. Then afterwards, he can worry about, okay, well, actually, now that we're going to bring this to a negotiated settlement. That's what he should do right now. If he's doing the right thing, the leadership thing, is to bring this war to a conclusion quickly so it just eliminates any chance of escalation. If it does escalate, then he's contrasted with President Trump, who is on record as saying that he would have ended this long before. And I think he probably, if he had been in office, I think that there's a legitimate shot there would never have been a war for various reasons we could discuss later. But he's on record as saying now that he wants to end this quickly. So if he's telling voters, I want to end the war and eliminate the possibility of escalation, and then Biden escalates it, then they're going to turn on him, because now all of a sudden, this is not some Afghanistan or Iraq kind of war. This is a real war that we could suffer huge casualties and suffer egregiously, and there's no way that helps an incumbent in an election.
So what you're saying is, from a strategic point of view, and I don't want to make this a political strategy discussion, but the Trump campaign could blindside the Biden administration by how hard they push on this issue, because if they take a de-escalation position, and they could really put pressure on the Biden administration in the heat of the final, mile of the election. Daniel, what do you think?
I do. And as a matter of fact, I think there's another risk that the Biden White House is suffering right now, or incurring, by trying to get past the election date with nothing happening, because the Russians have a methodical battle plan that you're using patience, but also so much with firepower, and they are just whittling away at the Ukraine military. I'm not the only one that sees there's no military path for Ukraine to ever win. And at some point, you can see where the possibility is that the casualties get so high that the people on the Ukraine side say, why am I going to just throw my life away in the toilet for nothing? There's no possibility of success. And all of a sudden, the coherence of the Ukrainian military just collapses. That's far more possible than people are aware. I can't predict that it'll happen, because history sometimes shows that people will continue to go on for years if they need to. But it's also quite possible that Russia's strategy could succeed, and sometime between now and November, there could be a collapse of a portion of the front, and that will be horrible for the Biden campaign. We'll forget about the war itself, but if all of a sudden Ukraine is seen to have lost, then that's going to mean that everything Biden has tried to do had failed, and that Russia, instead of being weakened, is going to be strengthened, and that's just not going to go well for the Biden team.
Well, if what you say is true, and all indications are, Daniel, that what you're saying is actually what is happening, that means it's actually a huge risk and a huge motivator for the regime in Kiev to basically do that very thing, which is escalate to draw the U.S. in, because there's probably people in Kiev thinking that they're going to get thrown under the bus after the election by either Biden or Trump. So that's kind of this is a dangerous window, isn't it?
I completely agree with you. I think that is a very legitimate possibility. And, you know, again, I'd say that the wise thing to do for the American president is just to be honest about this with the American people, say, we're going to bring this to a negotiated settlement. We've done the best they could, but there's just not the manpower on the Ukraine side, no matter how much money we ever give them. And so let's make sure we end this war and get them the best deal they can. I think you could still parlay that into a positive thing, because that shows leadership and it shows the wisdom in what you're going to do. I'm afraid, though, that he's just going to try to say, just let it limp along until after the election and don't do anything to upset it. But then that also makes this whole decision to allow launches into Russia with our stuff even more bizarre, because that doesn't fit any kind of context. I don't know how he benefits from that, or anybody for that matter. So it's kind of strange.
Well, I mean, so you have experience in large organizations with a very structured chain of command. So let's talk about what's happening in Washington. There's a lot of people that have criticized the Biden administration. They believe Joe Biden is not the chief executive. He's not making executive calls, that these decisions are being made by committee. Now, if that's the case, you know, where you have this massive bloated National Security Council, you have this coterie of advisors, you've got Obama's office, you've got other people in that orbit. When you have decisions made by committee, how dangerous is that in a situation like this?
Well, it's really bad. And I can't speak to whether that is happening, because I'm not inside, so I don't have any direct knowledge. I can just see the evidence from the outside, and it's skeptical or suspicious, I guess, to say the least, of what you described there. And if you have a situation like that where there's not a strong person in charge that gives orders and tells the rest of the organization what to do, then you have a lot of freelancers and people and Trump saw this. Trump was a victim of this, because he hired a lot of people who had different loyalties, and they worked against him behind the scenes, and that caused a lot of chaos. But he was a pretty strong personality. If you have that same kind of chaos working background, you don't have a strong personality, which Biden isn't, then you have a lot more possibilities for trouble.
The head of the British military, Tony Radigan, who's, you know, just in recent years has been promoted to head of the armed forces in the UK. He's adamant. He said recently in a statement that Ukraine won't trigger World War III. He's giving his assurances that this isn't going to happen, and he believes that he's confident in the strength of NATO to project that strength as a deterrent to what he considers to be Russian aggression. But the fact that, you know, he's having to make this public statement means that a lot of people are catching on this concern, Daniel. And so this conversation is starting to happen throughout Europe and in the United States as well, that this is a very dangerous point in history right now. So we have a general election coming up in the UK. That's in a month, I guess. That could have some bearing on this, plus the US election here. So, you know, your best prognosis, your final thoughts on how you think this may or should play out.
Well, you know, it's kind of ironic that he's saying that, you know, we can deter Russia. Russia's already deterred. They didn't want to have this war in the first place. They tried to have a negotiated settlement all throughout. They're still trying to do a negotiated settlement right now. They don't want this to escalate, but they're saying that if you keep going on to us and striking us, then we'll have no choice but to react. You know, the issue of the conventional disparity and of NATO over Russia, Putin has been nothing but agreeing to that. He has said we definitely can't go toe-to-toe with NATO conventionally. We can't. And so we won't ever try. But we do have a bigger nuclear arsenal than you do. And if you press a bad situation, you'll put us into a position where we have to go this route because it's the only one we have. So we need to deter ourselves from stupidity and not go down a path that we don't need to win, because we can negotiate our way out of this right now and avoid all of this. And I don't know I haven't seen what any of the political parties in the UK are saying, and I hope some of them go down this path so that they have a chance to get voted in. I think George Galloway's one. I don't know how many other people are similar to that. But and Trump has so far been saying he wants to bring the war to an end as well. So I hope voters pay attention to that as well, so that we can get the threat and the risk of nuclear war, as absurd as it is, off the table.
Yeah, and like you said before, Russia is, prepared to escalate to de-escalate. The deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, he's basically said he believes that Russians all believe that the U.S. is very, very close to making a fatal miscalculation with its client state in Ukraine. And he's talking about these targeting of Russian facilities in the Belgorod region, as you say, just across from Kharkov. And he says, quote, this is a warning that should be heeded by people in Washington, I think, but I'm afraid it's not. He said, I'd like to warn American actors against miscalculations that can lead to fatal consequences. For some unclear reason, they underestimate how serious a response they could face. So he's saying this publicly. So this is no joke. I mean, for a high-ranking Russian government official to say this publicly, along with President Putin and others.
Yeah.
So this is the view of the Russian state. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Putin himself, Ryabkov was basically paraphrasing something Putin himself had said at length in a conference, for a press conference, I think 3 days prior, where he explicitly said, do not underestimate us, do not miscalculate, because we will defend our interest if it comes down to it. And like you said, we just seem to be wanting to play right up to the edge of that. I don't understand why we're doing that, because there's no benefit to us in any capacity.
Really playing right up to the edge, as you say. And the doomsday clock has never been closer to midnight as it is right now. Certainly that should be a point of concern. My personal feeling, Daniel, is that it's going to have to take a strong leader, either from North America or from Europe itself, to basically come up from a major country and make some kind of a definitive statement. And then that kind of will open the door to a more sane conversation, I think, because at the moment that hasn't quite happened yet. Donald Trump, what he said in the last 24 hours is probably the closest thing I've seen to that so far. But I think that has to happen. It has to be a UN Security Council member like France, or maybe someone in the UK or in Germany, or I don't know. That's really it.
Yeah, so, and France keeps going in the wrong direction, leading in the opposite direction. So they're not a big candidate for that. So yeah, it's hard for me to see who is. I mean, I've been looking for a positive leader like that, and I haven't found anything. The closest has been is the leader of Hungary, who anytime he tries to move in a direction that says we want to negotiate a settlement, he's always pasted as being, oh, you're pro-Putin or whatever. So that doesn't seem to be helping either. So I'm just worried.
Well, we had Robert Fico, Prime Minister of Slovakia, for his sane position on this. He attempted assassination. Luckily, he's recovering. Be interesting to see what he says once he's made his full recovery and comes back into the public. But Viktor Orban, it really is it. And I think his position takes weight because he's bordering the conflict. Hungary is will be directly affected by any escalation. So they are very important. He's been very consistent. So I think that's a good start in Central Europe there. Marine Le Pen is also making noises to this effect, really challenging Emmanuel Macron, but we're not close to a leadership change, unfortunately, at the moment in France. So we shall see. We'll wait and see. It could be a case, Daniel, where the penny might drop in Germany. I know that the German public are not keen to fight a war with Russia. And if they sense maybe that they're being dragged into a situation, you could see some kind of a political upheaval with a very unpopular Green Party right now in Germany, led by Annalena Baerbock, and some of these Green war hawks that have emerged as the biggest cheerleaders for the war in Ukraine. And so we'll see. There is possibilities there. But Daniel Davis, really appreciate you joining us, host of Deep Dive with Daniel Davis on YouTube. I will direct people over to your program there. We've also got your Twitter feed posted on our show post at 21 Wire. Follow Danny Davis, ladies and gentlemen. He's got great programming and great advice at these really troubling times in history. We need good, sane voices and analysts like yourself, Daniel. So really appreciate you coming on board this week on TNT.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That's Daniel Davis. Listen, we'll get more onto this topic tomorrow as well. There's more analysis to come, some updates as well. Very pleased to see Donald Trump's statement in the last 24 hours. It's exactly what I think the country needs. I think it's what the world needs. And I think, we need more of this. This has to de-escalate, ladies and gentlemen. As it stands right now, the situation has gone way too far, and we are really at that point right now, at that 0 point, where things could go really completely haywire if it goes any further. So the Biden administration, unfortunately, I think has crossed the ultimate red line. You don't escalate in a nuclear exchange with the Russian Federation, and they've absolutely done it. And it didn't get any press coverage in the last 72 hours. That in itself should shock everybody. But rest assured, we're covering it. We're going to cover it here. We're going to make noise about it. I'm going to take to X on Twitter and put out a video as well on this in the next 24 hours and challenge the stakeholders to do something about this. So that's what we're doing here. Thank you for coming along for the ride today. We'll see you same time, same place tomorrow. Big hello to everybody in the TNT chat community. Big up to everybody in there. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. We'll see you guys next time tomorrow.